everybody, what is up? Cobra here, and we are back with the Allies' counter-offensives against the Eastern Pact. This is now round 3, or round 2, and the prior half of it, so round 3 will be next video. But, as you can see here, we'll start out with the purchases. The US purchased a couple of tanks, infantry, and frigate. The NATO faction saved a buck, represented by that ship. They have a couple more tanks, the first ones of this game, and an infantry army. And lastly, for the Pacific Coalition, we've got a kind of mixed bag of infantry, a tank, and airborne, and so forth. So, already went through the technology and cyber warfare. We had 3 cyber warfare successes, and also a technology success. So the Pacific Coalition was able to roll for a successful tech roll, and they ended up getting their special ability, which is Advanced Cyber Warfare. So as you can see, they start with 3, and they are at the lowest of anyone in the game. But once they hit that technology, they now have 6 to spend. Sadly, I spent these before doing the tech roll, because you can do them in separate order. So I wasn't able to spend the last 3 that were given to me, but for next turn we now have 6, and we'll get that for the rest of the game, which now makes them the best cyber warfare faction in the game. So we've already conducted, and then also, so cyber warfare that was successful, we had down here now, of course, from last turn, you know that Indonesia went to, or fell, or was annexed, or joined the Chinese faction, and the Chinese were able to reinforce the fleet down here, so now they have a second task force down in the South Seas. So the Indian fleet decided to finally set sail and try to take out this navy. Now they don't have any sort of LHDs or airborne infantry to be able to stage an assault on any of these territories, but just to take out this minor fleet and limit the Chinese ability to exert power in the area, force them to come in here and try and whittle down this fleet. So they ended up getting 2 military intelligence successes down here. That means that 2 of their units will be able to re-roll, or roll a second die. So like, say this guided missile destroyer will be able to have the possibility of making 2 hits in this turn. And of course 1 more unit, maybe the helicopter or the sub. So up top here we have a couple little sporadic assaults. We have a cruise missile coming from South Korea to try to hit the Chinese fleet, and we have a fighter jet from South Korea coming up into Manchuria to try and do a surgical strike to maybe take out an infantry. And since there isn't any Chinese fighters to counteract him, although, you know, we're always full of changes with this, and now that I see it, the Chinese do have 2 fighters here that they could scramble, so we could lose that fighter, and I don't want to risk that, so we will pull him back to South Korea. So, furthermore, you know, now that I think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, that won't work either. So, that fighter will stay there in South Korea to help defend. The biggest battle, or one of the biggest battles of this turn, is down here, where the entirety of the Indian army, or almost the entirety of the Indian army, is coming in here to Southeast Asia with the hopes of possibly not taking, but severely crippling the Chinese land forces in the area. As you can see, the Chinese have devoted a lot to defenses in terms of putting a ton of infantry down here, but laying off on stuff like air power and tanks, just with the sense of trying to hold the line instead of pushing it. So the Indians are going to try and come in, weaken this up, and especially, you know, they're going to have to reinforce India because you've got the Caliphate on the other side of things. And so the Caliphate doesn't have any fighters to oppose a surgical strike, so the Indian fighter is coming in to do that. And the Indian air base is launching a cruise missile to whittle down, hopefully, a couple of Caliphate infantry on the border there. So, coming around, next up, we'll take it to Europe. So in Europe here, we have the forces in Italy coming into the Balkan states. So you can see we got 2 American infantry, a NATO fighter jet, 2 NATO infantry, and a drone that can lend some support to those forces. And up top, we have a pretty wide-ranging assaults across Europe to try to cripple the Russian offensive here. So we've got a big combined arms army. It's not massive. It's probably about equal strength to the Russians. But we're going to try to come in, maybe take back Germany, because the Russians don't have a lot in behind to back them up. And we have a slurry of cruise missiles, one coming in to Germany. We have an airborne assault into Denmark, which is unopposed. We have a cruise missile strike to hopefully knock out that LHD or maybe take out that fighter jet. And over here we have an unopposed airborne assault on Turkey to hopefully, or that will take that back and surround and trap the forces in Russian-controlled Greece. We also have a cruise missile, as you can see, coming from the Cyprus air base to try to knock out some of those Caliphate units to weaken up their forces down there in the Mediterranean. So another thing that happened I guess I didn't mention, was diplomacy and another successful a diplomatic role and a successful cyber warfare role. So as you can see, the Americans have aligned Brazil. Their Brazilian cruiser, or frigate, has come up here, and you can see that there. The entirety of the Brazilian land forces are coming up into Venezuela to also support 2 infantry that are coming from this American LHD that came down from the United States. We have a helicopter that's flying all the way out from Europe that's going to have to land on the LHD or that carrier there in the middle of the Atlantic. A bunch of fighters coming from the LHD and supercarrier to support the land invasion, along with 2 cruise missiles being fired at Venezuela. So America's hoping to knock out the Russian threat entirely, or mostly entirely, in South America. And we've got an airborne assault and cruise missile coming into Panama just to... it's not paramount that Panama is taken, but it would help. And the Americans didn't know if their diplomacy was going to succeed in Brazil. So what they had done is got some military intelligence on Mexico in hopes that basically the American plan, and something that I think is a decent idea, is that if America is really not being able to take Brazil or align them, because once Brazil's taken, Russia has just about lost their foothold in South America, considering the magnitude that Brazil has compared to the Russian Venezuelan faction. But if the Americans can't align Brazil, their best bet is to come in through Mexico, because they invade Mexico, only 2 infantry, and on the west coast it's unopposed, and now they have a land border with Panama and they can start driving down. So the Americans, while aligning Brazil, they don't need to invade Mexico. The fact that they succeeded and they've got a couple units here, they're going to try to take out Mexico, and they've got a invasion over here on the west coast, taking out the Baja Peninsula and gaining another IPP. So that is all of the combats down here. Nothing's happening in Africa this turn, as the Caliphate have pushed headstrong into the East African states, although we do have some plans to defend the South African coalition at the end of the turn. So I will see you there once combat has been done. Alright everybody, so now that combat has concluded, I will show you what is going on and the non-combat movements. So first off, America didn't do too well in South America. As you can see, they did take out Venezuela with only 1 casualty, but their airborne assault failed in Panama, and their infantry and tank were lost at the cost of 1 infantry in Mexico, and now Mexico has gone to the Russians. Further on, the American attempts at those Russian subs failed, so they still are going strong. Over in Germany, or in Europe as a whole actually, the Russians faltered pretty quick. As you can see, NATO and allied forces have taken back Denmark, Germany, the Balkan states, and Turkey, with not much in the rear, but that is what's going on there. Down here, so the Southeast Asia saw the most combat this game. The Indian fighter and cruise missile strike on, let's just get the camera set up here, on Iran-Pakistan took 2 infantry at no losses. Now, the big issue was that in Southeast Asia, the probing attack by the Indian army didn't do too well, and as you can see, they only came out of it with 2 infantry, a tank, and a fighter. So the Chinese lost, I think it was 2 infantry, a tank, and a helicopter. So they definitely took off a decent amount of units, but the Indians lost about 5 infantry, which, as you can see, they are surrounded and don't have a ton of units left. Over here in the Southeast Pacific, we have the Indian Navy, which has come out. It did not get hit by any Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles. It was unable to attack that submarine there, which has now gone on silent running, but it did take out the 2 Chinese frigates and now has more or less naval supremacy in Southeast Asia. And that was just about it. All cruise missile attacks in the Pacific failed against the U.S. fleet, and a combat that I did not declare, but I ended up doing anyways, was the airborne, or 3 airborne from Washington came down to Guam, and with the assistance of the U.S. Air Force in the Pacific, was able to take back Guam with force at no losses. So that is it for combat conclusions, and getting into non-combat movements. So first off, we'll start over here. So this helicopter has gone, let's see, 1, 2, 3. He only has 1 space left. We're just going to land him on the LHD. So he'll land like that. This drone also has, I think he has 1 space because he came from this carrier. So he's just going to go, we'll keep him on the carrier. Actually, we're going to put him on the LHD so that he can maybe help out the American ground forces next turn. So our fighters, we've got 1 that came 1 from the LHD, so he's going to go 2, 3, 4, and land in Spain. Hopefully give some... Actually, he's going to land back in the United States. We're going to need him just to safeguard the borders because we don't want the Russians in Mexico doing any funny business. And the other fighter will land on the supercarrier in the Central Pacific off the Canary Islands. Furthermore, I think the U.S. task force will stay where it is, although this sub we're going to send out because he could do some other things and not just sit here, because we already have a guided missile destroyer to fire missiles. So he's going to come 1, 2, down to Cape Basin. So up here in Europe, don't mind the large fleets. I'm going to be going over that in next video, in a little bit of a corrections spiel. So going in over here, so we have a U.S. fighter that's just going to come back to France, along with a NATO fighter and drone, leaving just 2 U.S. tanks and a helicopter in Russia. This helicopter in Denmark is landing there too. This drone has to come back to Italy, and the Balkan states will have some defenders left. This fighter's coming back to its LHD, and this drone here was debating on taking him somewhere else, but I don't think he's got enough movements to really go anywhere. We'll leave him on that LHD. So that is it for non-combats in Europe. We did have, okay, so one down here was that the NATO infantry is going to sea lift from the Central African states to South Africa to put up a defense. I'd rather have them defending a higher value target than that Central African states area. And getting in over in the Indian Ocean, I've decided with the Allies to help support India. Their support was going to be going towards South Africa this turn, but with the failure of the Indian army to secure any decent headway in Southeast Asia, we're going to have to help reinforce them pretty heavily. So the US, first off, is just going to non-com this drone and this helicopter, and they're going to go 1, 2 into India. And we'll get them on some flight stands. There we go. Alright, this submarine here is going to go 1, 2 into the Bay of Bengal. And these forces here are going to sea lift from Taiwan, and they can't go through this strait right here. They're going all the way around it, and they have just enough spaces to do that. So this U.S. infantry and MBT are sea lifting into India. And then I think that was it for Indian reinforcements. Getting in over, let's see, oh yeah, the Pacific Coalition is going to sea lift 1 infantry from Australia over to India. They are also, I think that's just about it for Pacific Coalition. The Americans over here in the Pacific. So their sub is going to stay where it is because it is in a optimal position for firing cruise missiles. Although I think we might want to move him down. He's going to go down to here, so that now he can fire on the Chinese mainland or the Chinese fleet if need be. Plus, it can kind of help safeguard Taiwan. So, getting in up north, this infantry here conducted combat in Mexico, so it has to stay. We're going to sea lift this MBT as we have 1 sea lift left. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't see that. 6 into Taiwan. That's off the screen, but we'll just place him there so you guys can know that he's there. Then, you know, now that I think about it, we're actually going to move that tank into Australia's safe, so we'll go to Taiwan with him, as he can't get too far. And furthermore, let's see, the forces on Hawaii are going to have to stay there because we don't want any sneaky Chinese assault on Hawaii. We're going to swap these forces, so basically this fighter is going to land on Midway, so it can scramble out if our fleet is attacked, and this helicopter will land on the LHD, so he can conduct combat if the zone is attacked. And that should be just about it. I'm debating on moving that fighter out of Alaska, but I think he's going to stay there for now at least. I am worried about any sort of Chinese assault because they could launch that LHD to take, you know, somewhere like Australia or help an invasion into India or something like Alaska or Canada. But we'll have to counter that if they do because we don't have the resources to defend everything at once. So I guess we'll get into placement of units. So on the west coast we have another frigate to try to hunt down those pesky submarines, and we have an infantry which is gonna go, you know, one thing I'm gonna do actually is this frigate's going here. We are gonna non-com the US fleet back because I really don't have a lot of forces in the mainland US and I don't want to risk an invasion. These forces will stay on Hawaii as it's quite important and it doesn't have much support. And this fighter also, we're going to land him on Hawaii too. That is it for placement over here. And you know, just because I had some placements for the West Coast East Coast, and they're going to be placed on the West Coast now because we want it further defended. So we got another MBT and infantry coming in California, and then getting over to the West Coast deployment. Sorry, keep getting these confused. The East Coast deployment, we have an MBT and an infantry going into the southeastern United States to try and launch a successful offensive to kick out the Russian-aligned nations from South America and Northern America now. Alright, getting into NATO. It's time to go on the offensive here. So we've got 2 new armor, and we'll be placing that into Italy. They can get a little bit farther if they're there instead of France. And we have a bunch of infantry, so place 1 up there in Scandinavia, and we got a couple more. We're going to go into Italy, further defend all these territories, and the ones in Italy are probably going to go on the offensive next turn. And that is it for their placement. Now, again, I told you I was going to talk about this fleet next video, but because I have it, they're going to move down an infantry from England, and it's just going to go, this LHD is going to move. Actually, forgetting about that fleet, we can just sea lift a unit, so he's going to sea lift all the way around into Italy. That is it for NATO. And finally, the Pacific Coalition. They have got to shore up their defenses. So we have a new MBT being placed into India. We have an airborne being placed into Australia. And kind of get... you guys know that there's that airborne in Australia now. Alright. And then we have 2 more infantry being placed into India, along with 1 more infantry in India. I'm just kind of redistributing my purchases. I'll have to ship all those out. And the final infantry will go into South African Federation, or Coalition. And one last non-com that I just remembered was that this frigate up here is going to go 1, 2, try to link up with the Pacific at some point. So that is it for the Western Alliance turn 2, and I will see you again for the Eastern Pact turn 3, along with some corrections that you guys have pointed out. Alright, Cobra, out.